The fact that Leslie Wexner has never been investigated for his role in the Epstein scandal is absolutely bonkers. Do what you can to extricate yourself and your family from this power structure that is predatory, it's evil, it kills kids, it rapes kids. The music industry had become tied up with the private prison industry. An asset is definitely fair to say, at the very least. If they want to blackmail you or know something about you, they just access what Palantir sucked up about you.
Like, what are we well,
Epstein was interested in Chomsky for AI purposes.
If journalists did at all their jobs, every 4 sentences that you say should be 4 weeks of news coverage doing in-depth education of the American public. Are you ever worried about drawing attention for the kind of research and reporting that you do?
In the 2024 campaign, there was a lot of signaling, not just from Trump, but from, J.D. Vance and some of these other figures, some of Trump's children, on social media, and I believe also interviews, basically promising the release of Epstein documents if Trump were to be elected. And this is also true of things that were stated by the current FBI director and FBI deputy director. And, a few months before things really exploded with Trump getting kind of feisty on his social media posts, we had, Kash Patel and Dan Bongino and sort of basically come out and say Epstein definitely killed himself and all this stuff. And then Pam Bondi, kind of followed suit. And then they released this video that has a minute missing, which obviously, is going to make people that think Epstein didn't kill himself, or at least didn't kill himself without help from the outside. It's not going to put any conspiracies to rest if there's like a minute plus missing, and then the metadata shows that the video was edited. And so there's been all this backpedaling, but it's very bizarre that they would mishandle this so extensively. I mean, maybe they thought that the base didn't really care that much, or that they could distract them with something else eventually if they never had the intention to release these things, which is what seems to be the case. But now, I think now they're trying to use the distraction or develop new distractions, as soon as this kind of boiled over and really kind of splintered and angered a large segment of Trump's base. There were releases of, documents on the MLK assassination, and Tulsi Gabbard has now been releasing stuff on Russiagate, and Trump is putting all the stuff like AI videos of Obama getting arrested. So now it's kind of trying to shift gears and get the base riled up about something else and be like, please forget about the Jeffrey Epstein case. But it's kind of, it's really bizarre, particularly the most bizarre of it all would be Trump's own response. He obviously fails to understand how a large segment of his base feels about this case by trying to, wash it away and call it a Democrat-invented hoax and all of this stuff.
Mr. President, I know you want to move past all this intrigue over the Epstein files, but I do want to ask you to clarify something you said this morning. You said this was all a hoax. Has your Attorney General told you this was a hoax? What evidence have you seen of that?
No, it's not the Attorney General, no. I know it's a hoax. It's started by Democrats. It's been run by the Democrats for 4 years. You had Christopher Wray and these characters, and Comey before him. And it's a bad group. It started, actually, look at the Steele dossier that turned out to be a total hoax. The 51 agents, the intelligence, so-called intelligence agents, it was a hoax. It's all been a big hoax. It's perpetrated by the Democrats. And some stupid Republicans and foolish Republicans fall into the net. And so they try and do the Democrats' work. The Democrats are good for nothing other than these hoaxes. They're bad for policy. They're bad for picking candidates that can get elected. Like in New York, we have a communist running. He may get elected too, actually, but he'll destroy the city. It's I call it the Epstein hoax. It takes a lot of time and effort. Instead of talking about the great achievements, we've had a great gentleman yesterday, as you know, went on CNBC and he made the statement that Trump may go down as the greatest president of all in the United States. And instead of talking about the things we've achieved, we've had tremendous achievement. They're wasting their time with a guy who obviously had some very serious problems, who died 3-4 years ago. I'd rather talk about the success we have with the economy, the best we've ever had, and all of the things we've done, including in the Middle East. I mean, you see it. Instead, they want to talk about the Epstein hoax. And the sad part is it's people that are really doing the Democrats' work. They're stupid people. Yeah, go ahead.
And it's complicated. I think a lot of people have forgotten that Jeffrey Epstein's death in prison happened during the first Trump administration. So anything that would be released that would suggest that something unusual happened the night that he died would come back to roost for the previous Trump Department of Justice and presumably former Attorney General William Barr. And somehow a lot of people have forgotten that.
That's such an important point. That's such an important point. I want to get into some of what you just sort of alluded to there. One, the fact of Donald Trump, including in his administration, so many figures that had vocally been proponents of the idea that there is some kind of cover up going with respect to Jeffrey Epstein's death because of some kind of complicity with the powers that be, that there's a blackmail scandal, that there's some kind of government control going on there. And that is why so many important people feel like there needs to be a cover up. And these include Dan Bongino, who was a sort of a podcaster, a commentator prior to being brought into the Trump administration. And that lent a sense of credibility, it seems to me, to Donald Trump as someone who wasn't afraid and who was willing to investigate Epstein. But it does seem like perhaps Trump didn't think far enough ahead to think that his base would actually want this particular issue to be pursued, and that the fact of including some of these voices within his administration wouldn't be enough to just satisfy a public that really thought there was a there with respect to Epstein and perhaps even a Trump connection.
Yeah, so, my opinion generally is that some figures in the Trump administration were kind of chosen as a PR move and that they're not actually in charge of what they're nominally in charge of. So like Pete Hegseth, head of the Pentagon, he's kind of a Fox and Friends, he's a TV show host. And the deputy director of the Pentagon, Steve Feinberg of Cerberus Capital, is most likely the person actually running the Pentagon, not Hegseth, in my opinion. And I think that's true also for RFK Jr. in charge of HHS. I don't really think he's running. He's just kind of this figure that connected with Trump's base, particularly during the COVID era, and made them think reforms would come. And those reforms haven't really come, but he's kind of there to give the impression that things have changed. But the person behind him, the deputy secretary, is Jim O'Neill, who's a career affiliate of Peter Thiel, who's also the power behind JD Vance and, the man that made Palantir what it is. And so, I think it's just a way of sort of masking the people that are actually running stuff. And I think that's probably true, too, of Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, who were basically out there. They were making the rounds on podcasts and were making these connections and building trust and relationships with the public in Trump's base. But it seems like they're not actually running anything, in my opinion. They're kind of figureheads in a way, and they're willing figureheads, I would say.
Yeah, there was that hostage video. It felt like a hostage video with Kash Patel and Dan Bongino kind of sitting there saying, no, we looked and there's no scandal, there's no Epstein cover up.
Yeah, and that's what Trump's base, a lot of them thought too. And it's kind of impressive in a sense that would not have been an anticipated reaction to these guys being rolled out to do that. So maybe I don't really know what to think about it. It's very odd. And I think either it was a drastic underestimation of how much this case matters to the American public, or maybe it was something else that, has yet to make itself apparent. I honestly don't know, but it's definitely been very bizarre, and a lot of the comms have been seem to have been, it's just been bungled, frankly.
Yeah. So you mentioned the video. That's the Epstein jail cell surveillance video that was sort of released as there's nothing to see here, but they hadn't cleared the metadata, and it was apparent that there was missing content from this video.
Yeah, and apparently also, it focuses on a few cell doors, but those weren't the doors to Epstein's cell. In the bottom, you can see the path to a stairwell that leads to where Epstein's cell was. So it's not even really that, the entry to where Epstein was is not actually the focus of the video, but I guess having it on those doors makes people think that kind of misleadingly, those were the doors to where Epstein was. And that's not the case.
Okay.
And were there other, stairwells or entrances to that block of cells where Epstein was that weren't on film? I mean, again, it's not conclusive at all. Even
Okay.
if,
So, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, I was just saying it's not conclusive at all necessarily, even if there wasn't time missing in the video.
I see. Okay, that's an important point. But what the takeaway from all of this is, including the Obama deepfake videos, the efforts to pin the tail on anybody but Donald Trump, and all these other distraction techniques that have happened over the last week or so, that the Trump campaign knows this is a vulnerability. And they're trying to get out of it after having, it seems, miscalculated the one, interest of their audience in this, and two, how insulated they would be from having to actually do anything to investigate the, alleged Epstein cover up, as long as they just brought some of these vocal kind of Epstein truthers into the fold. Now, you've written this piece on Unlimited Hangout that proposes a theory. Now, some folks think, well, Trump's effort to distract from all of this must be because he's implicated. You say it might be the case, but it also might be the case that he's trying to protect one or multiple very close friends of his that are also potentially implicated. Tell me what you've written about here.
So yeah, I started a new series, which is called First Friends, which is sort of like a play on, like First Lady. And yeah, the idea is what you said, exploring the possibility of figures close to Donald Trump, still close to Donald Trump, that have unusual, or rather that have never been reported about connections to Epstein. Which suggests that, if I could find it, I'm sure the New York Times and these people could have found it too. And why haven't they reported on it, especially if there's blood in the water against their least favorite president, right? So the first person in this series is about a man named Flavio Briatore, who's probably best known for his career as a top guy in Formula One racing in Europe. He's Italian. He's also pretty well known for having dated and been engaged at one time to Naomi Campbell, and later fathering Heidi Klum's first child, Lenny Klum. But beyond that, he's a longtime friend of Donald Trump. As I put in the article, there's a video of them together doing the Italian edition of The Apprentice, because, as Trump says in the video, when it was time to bring The Apprentice to Italy, there were lots of people that wanted to star in it, but he only wanted one person, and that was his longtime friend, Flavio, and they talk about their long-term friendship in that clip for those that are interested. But Flavio Briatore has a few unusual links to the Epstein case, which I explore here. And one of them has to do with the Black Book itself. So the Black Book is this book of contacts that are Epstein's, but Epstein didn't necessarily write it. His staff wrote it. And so it wasn't just one staff member, it was a few members of his staff in his Palm Beach residence that compiled this list of contacts. But it was deemed legitimate enough to be used as evidence in Ghislaine Maxwell's trial a couple years ago. So it's considered to give it was then considered to give a relatively accurate portrayal of the time of sort of, frequently contacted figures in Epstein's world during, the particular period of time that the Palm Beach case in particular spanned. And so that book became public. Well, it was originally published and made actually public by the investigative journalist Nick Bryant, who's also known for investigating the Franklin scandal, which is sort of a Reagan-Bush era pedophile scandal involving government officials. And he published that at Gawker, I believe, in 2015, but he came into possession of it sometime, I think, around 2012 or so, he said. But prior to that, the FBI obtained it from Jeffrey Epstein's former butler, Alfredo Rodriguez, who died the same year it was published in 2015. But earlier, he had tried to basically sell the Black Book initially to one of the victims' lawyers, Brad Edwards, who works with Stanley Pottinger at, I forget the name of their law firm, but they're two of the main Epstein lawyers. And so instead of buying the book, I mean, obviously it's fair that he wouldn't pay an enormous, the large sum that Rodriguez was asking for it. But Edwards instead tipped off the FBI and basically sicked the FBI on this guy. And the FBI set up a sting operation to buy the book from him, and Rodriguez went to prison, which later Epstein, when he was asked about it, said about the Black Book, he was like, it never should have been published. It was terrible that it was published, but now my butler, or, my former butler is in prison for, the crime of publishing it. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. That's not a direct quote, but that was essentially what he was saying. So he agreed with Rodriguez being put away. And it's important to point out that Epstein was an FBI informant during this period. So, there may have been some duplicity there, but again, I don't know. But what's important here is that Rodriguez, and when he tried to shop this book around, he circled names that he said were co-conspirators and material witnesses to Epstein's sex trafficking crimes. So Flavio Briatore is one of the circled names. Alan Dershowitz is a circled name. Les Wexner, Jean-Luc Brunel, who is the French accomplice of Epstein that died in prison while awaiting trial in 2022. And then Donald Trump is also a circled name, which oddly enough hasn't really gotten a lot of coverage over the years. Nick Bryant, of course, talked about that, but a lot of people act like Trump was never accused. And then Brad Edwards later went out and said to Derek Brose when he was interviewed by him that Trump had actually been very helpful. But of course, Trump and Epstein at that point had a personal falling out. And also Brad Edwards' law partner, Stanley Pottinger, has kind of a suspect history, sort of acting like the Democrat equivalent of William Barr, which is basically a mop-up man for government scandals. Over the course of his lengthy career as a lawyer working on behalf of the government and the Department of Justice. So there's a lot of question marks there.
Okay, so Whitney, I just want to make sure I'm following the implications. So in this book that Epstein's former butler was trying to shop and got caught up in the sting operation, there were a number of circled names that were supposed to indicate
material witnesses and co-conspirators and enablers, I guess.
To the sex trafficking.
Yes. But Rodriguez didn't specify why he circled those names. And he died the year that the book was published by Gawker, and also in prison. And I'm not really sure there's any information on the circumstances of his death. And that's also, of course, the year that Donald Trump declares his candidacy for president.
Okay, so the implication, the implication is that this butler knew and identified Donald Trump as being not just sort of, not to minimize it, but a visitor to the island or a friend of Epstein, but someone who was a material witness and more deeply implicated in this. That man, the butler, dies in prison the year that Donald Trump announces his candidacy for president in 2015.
Yep.
Okay, and moreover, you alluded to Epstein himself being an FBI agent.
Or informant.
Informant. Can you tell us more about how we know that to be true, and also what the implications are then for this sort of scenario that you've set up, where, I'm just gonna say, where the implication is that Donald Trump benefited enormously from this being buried because of the death of the man who circled him and fingered him as being substantively implicated in Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking. I mean,
no one can interview Alfredo Rodriguez now about why he chose to circle Trump's name or Briatore's name or any of these other figures. Courtney Love was also a circled name.
Interesting. What do we think that's about? Just she was there.
Hard to know. Some authors have speculated that, through her father, who was a road manager for the Grateful Dead, that she was sort of brought into this weird circle of intelligence link stuff, since authors more recently have sort of pointed to that band and some of these other groups in the 60s of having, CIA and other suspect connections, and sort of that a lot of the 60s counterculture was engineered for various purposes, but I'm not an expert on that, so I don't really want to speculate too much. But that's sort of been the I believe Covert Action magazine, actually, and I forget who the author was, so sorry about that. But they have a whole article detailing alleged ties between Courtney Love and some nefarious actors. So I'll refer people to that. I read it once, but I wasn't, I didn't absorb it enough, I guess.
Whitney, the way that you rattle off all of these facts and names, I don't think there's a single person listening that would judge you for not remembering the name of one magazine that talked about one article at some point about Courtney Love.
I also have a very young baby at home, so I'm sleep deprived, so that may influence things a little bit.
Even more of a credit to you, frankly. So,
thanks.
So I feel like I have to ask, is there any reason to sort of doubt the credibility or the motives of this Epstein butler, especially since he was caught trying to sort of like personally profit from the sale of this book?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, but at the time, Trump was not a political candidate, and a lot of the other names that are circled are people that are well known to have been accomplices to the crime, like Maxwell, like Jean-Luc Brunel, Leslie Wexner, Jeffrey Epstein's main benefactor. And we also do know, for example, that the most famous Epstein victim of all, who died earlier this year, Virginia Roberts, she was recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell while working at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. So there's a possibility that there may have been something there. But again, we don't really know because we can't ask the guy. But it is convenient that he cannot be asked. But there you go.
And there was no investigation into the circumstances of his death in prison, even given these suspicions around Epstein dying in similar circumstances?
I don't believe so. I was looking into it and was able to find out some other things, but was unable to find information on how he died in prison while serving a sentence related to this. What's also fascinating to me, though, is that 2015 is the year that Gawker starts to be sued into oblivion by Peter Thiel. And now we know that in 2014 and 2015, Thiel and Epstein were meeting regularly. And Peter Thiel was also an FBI informant during that time.
How do we know these men were FBI informants?
I'm pretty sure in the case of Epstein, and it's sourced in my book, but I'm pretty sure it's the FBI admitted it, or another aspect of the government admitted it because it came up in a court case. I forget which victim court case.
I mean, this sort of leads me to another piece of this, which frankly is the part I have to admit that is the most sort of intriguing. Along with the kind of MAGA base turning on Trump for not being transparent about Epstein, they are also increasingly frustrated with his betrayal as the quote unquote anti-war candidate and the America First candidate.
Sure.
And these things are related through Epstein to the extent that it has been often argued, and there has been speculation that the reason that the United States is so committed to Israel, no matter what it does, no matter how poorly it reflects on America's political reputation, no matter how much it costs America, no matter how much it costs individual political candidates in an electoral space, for example, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and now Donald Trump, who's taking a hit over it, is because there's some compromise. There's some relationship there. And Donald Trump being so close to Epstein, of course, raises the suspicion that he in particular has his hands tied and that he cannot change course politically with respect to America's unqualified support of Israel, because if he does, something disastrous, something scandalous will be revealed about him. So I would love you to speak to the claims that there is some sort of blackmail specifically that ties, that basically constrains Trump, this administration, other administrations' adherence to Israel as a country and Israel's choices in particular in Gaza right now, is the genocide.
So it's hard to know if it's blackmail or if it's because basically the same people behind Donald Trump are the same people behind Epstein. So even if they had a personal falling out, that wouldn't necessarily change the fact that their benefactors tend to have been more or less the same the same people. So it's also, I mean, it is possible that there is blackmail somewhere, that they're hanging over Trump's head on this particular case and on with the case of Israel, or it's the case that a lot of the powers that pull the strings of the current Likud government in Israel and, Donald Trump's administration are, have a lot of overlap. A lot of people have used my book and tried to say that I authoritatively say that Epstein was Mossad. And I definitely do argue for an Israeli state connection there. I also argue for a U.S. intelligence connection there. But essentially, what the thesis of my book is that during World War II, organized crime in the U.S., specifically the National Crime Syndicate, which was the Jewish American mob, in the Italian mafia, which then the main leader of the Italian mafia of this faction, and after World War II gets deported to Italy, and he sort of sets up shop there. They merge with intelligence interests, mainly the precursor to the CIA and American intelligence. And then that's sort of how the nexus behind Jeffrey Epstein and this broader network begins. And of course, a lot of those Jewish American organized crime interests are intimately involved with the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, specifically the arming of the Haganah and other armed paramilitary groups that enacted the Nakba and led to the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. And not just organized crime figures, but also some of these organized crime linked oligarch families, like the Bronfman family, also involved in that, for example. And basically, I explore how these networks developed in these various countries and argue that this is really a transnational power structure. So if I explain how that relates to Epstein in the book. But unfortunately, I kind of had to rush my book out at the time I was writing it because of a deadline. And so I didn't get to explore really Trump's ties fully to that. I did to an extent by exploring the ties of his mentor, Roy Cohn, to that. But Trump specifically, I found information later about his, how extensive those ties were. So I guess as an overview, Donald Trump, was mentored by Roy Cohn was a mob lawyer. He sort of had one foot in the legitimate world, having ties to the Reagan administration and the Nixon administration, for example. But he was also a lawyer for organized crime families in New York. And if you look at his background, his dad ran this secret society that later Edgar Bronfman and Leslie Wexner's mentors and a lot of these figures were part of, called B'nai B'rith. And then one of Roy Cohn's mentors was this Italian businessman who was very closely tied to the mob, named Generoso Pope. And Pope's son was Roy Cohn's best friend growing up. And from Pope, who was very tied up with the Sicilian mafia and also very close, and also the Italian mafia in New York, he was also a big fan of Mussolini-era fascism and controlled Italian language newspapers in New York and used that to try and manipulate Italian-American votes. And he basically taught Roy Cohn this system called the favor bank, Roy Cohn called it, which is basically we see today now in Trump's art of the deal, which is sort of how to establish backroom deals. You do a favor for me, I do a favor for you. And it's really, explains a lot of how political power has worked in the U.S. for some time. It's, of course, not exclusive to these people. But you can see how these things have developed over time. And so, in the case of Trump, around the year that Roy Cohn dies, he becomes the controlling shareholder of a company called Resorts International. So Resorts International has long-term affiliations to the same syndicate of organized crime, specifically the Jewish American head of it, Meyer Lansky. And Resorts International was also created initially. It was formerly Mary Carter Paint Company, which was is an acknowledged CIA front company. So basically, Donald Trump became controlling shareholder of this in '87. That's also the year, I believe, that he bought Adnan Khashoggi's yacht. And that yacht Khashoggi had used for sex blackmail purposes, as I note in my book. And then, Trump tries to expand with Resorts International his holdings at Atlantic City, New Jersey, but at the time they were trying to make the new Vegas, essentially. And of course, Vegas itself has a lot of historical organized crime connections, and so did a lot of the companies trying to make casinos in Atlantic City. But he eventually has financial issues with that, and in the early 90s has to be bailed out. He's going bankrupt, and he's bailed out by Rothschild banking interests. The main banker involved there, of course, is Wilbur Ross, who was Trump's Secretary of Commerce during his first term, and that appointment was seen as Trump sort of returning the favor in a way of him being bailed out by, the Rothschild Inc., essentially, in the early 90s. And if that bankrupt, if he hadn't been bailed out, then who knows if Trump would even still be around today as a businessman and a famous public figure.
Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.